David Carter, a retired high school teacher from Chicago, had spent decades molding young minds with the lessons of history. At 72, he had finally embraced a life of predictability, a quiet rhythm that brought him comfort. Each afternoon, he strolled the familiar 2 blocks to Tommy's Cafe, a small yet welcoming spot on Maple Street where the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Ryan, the young barista, always had his order ready before he even spoke. Black coffee, no sugar. Their exchanges were brief but warm, a silent understanding between two people separated by generations yet bound by familiarity. The cafe was David's sanctuary, a slice of normalcy in a world that often felt unpredictable. For years, David had claimed his usual spot by the window, sipping his coffee as he watched life pass by. The murmur of conversations, the gentle clinking of porcelain cups, the soft hum of the espresso machine, it all formed the soundtrack to his daily ritual. With a newspaper spread neatly before him, he read every page, absorbing the world's news before carefully folding it away. It was his moment of peace, a simple but profound way to recharge before making his way back home. The Chicago summer had begun tightening its grip, the heat creeping up earlier each day, urging him to leave before it became unbearable. But that afternoon, something felt off, something subtle, yet undeniably different. One more wait, as David stepped out of Tommy's cafe, coffee in hand, newspaper tucked beneath his arm, a strange stillness settled over the street. The usual hum of the city had dulled, as if someone had turned down the volume of everyday life. He hesitated, his gut whispering a warning he couldn't quite name. Then the quiet was interrupted by the low rumble of an approaching squad car, black and white. The engine's purr sliced through the uneasy silence as the vehicle rolled to a slow stop, right in front of him. He considered walking past, convincing himself it was just coincidence. Maybe they weren't here for him, but the driver's side window lowered, and within moments 2 officers stepped out. The younger one, barely in his 20s, had the stiff, over-disciplined posture of someone still new to the force, his buzzed hairline revealing his inexperience. The other officer was different, bigger, older, with an air of authority that didn't need to be spoken. He moved with the kind of confidence that made people listen, even when they didn't want to. "Sir, we need to see some identification," the younger officer said, his tone flat, almost mechanical. David inhaled slowly, keeping his expression unreadable. He had been here before, too many times. His father, his grandfather, they had all warned him about moments like these. The world changed, but some things never did. The rules were ingrained in his bones. Stay calm, don't escalate, keep your hands visible. His voice remained even as he tilted his head slightly. "Is there a problem, officers?" The older officer shifted, resting a hand on his belt. "We got a call about a suspicious person matching your description." Suspicious. The word hung in the air, heavy and unspoken with meaning. David glanced down at himself. Khaki slacks, a crisp button-up, neatly trimmed beard. A retired teacher with a coffee in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. Suspicious? He looked around. A few bystanders had slowed their steps. A woman pushing a stroller, a cyclist lingering just a little too long. The weight of their stares pressed against him. "You sure about that?" David asked, raising a questioning brow. The younger officer squared his shoulders, trying to summon authority he didn't quite own yet. "We just need to check your ID. Standard procedure." David knew better, knew exactly where this was going. He had two choices: comply and be on his way, or refuse and let things unfold as they always did. He reached into his pocket, moving deliberately, extracting his wallet. But before he could pass it over, the older officer stepped forward, hand hovering near his belt. "Stop. Hands on the car." The words hit like a command, not a request. The air around them grew tighter. David's breath shallowed. This wasn't about an ID anymore. This was about power. His pulse quickened, but he refused to show fear. He had watched enough headlines, seen enough names turned into hashtags to know how easily things could go wrong. He kept his voice firm but calm. "Can you tell me why I'm being detained?" The younger officer hesitated, glancing at his partner. The older cop remained unmoved. "You fit the description," he repeated. David could feel the moment shifting. Someone in the crowd was already recording. This wasn't just an interaction anymore. This was a story, a narrative unfolding in real time, and he was at the center of it. His body stiffened, every fiber of his being screaming that this was wrong, that he was tired of moments like this. "Do you have any weapons on you?" the young officer asked, his voice faltering slightly. David let out a breath, a bitter chuckle escaping. "Do I look like I have a weapon?" He had played by the rules his whole life, yet here he was, again, and something in him, something deep and weary, refused to let this go unnoticed. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Hands where I can see them," the older officer barked, his voice laced with sudden urgency. David didn't flinch. He held the phone up, his movements calculated, measured. "I'm calling my daughter." It rang twice, then 3 times, and then, "Hey, Dad, what's wrong?" Emily's voice was sharp, steady, always so sure, even in moments like this. David let out a slow breath. "They stopped me. They won't let me go." Emily Carter wasn't just anyone. She was the U.S. Attorney General. And as her voice rang through the speaker, cool and unwavering, the air around them changed. "This is Emily Carter, U.S. Attorney General," she announced. "I am addressing officers Mark Denny and Brian Holt." "Who am I speaking to?" A heavy silence settled over the street. The officers' faces stiffened, realization dawning on them like a cold wave. The younger officer instinctively stepped back, his eyes flicking toward his partner. The older cop's jaw tightened, his confidence visibly wavering. "You are currently detaining my father, a 72-year-old man, without cause," Emily continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I expect an immediate and clear explanation." 1348. Mark Denny opened his mouth, then closed it. His gaze flickered toward the growing crowd, the sea of phones capturing every moment. He had lost control of the situation. "If it was a misunderstanding," he mumbled, his voice now uncertain. David tightened his grip on the phone but remained still. He had done his part. Now the world was watching. Emily was already ahead of it. The crowd had seen enough. Whether the officers liked it or not, the story was already unraveling. The moment hung in the air, suspended in time, as if the world itself had paused to watch. The weight of silence thickened, pressing down on the street. The officers stood frozen, their authority slipping through their fingers like sand. Uncertainty flickered in their eyes. They had lost control and they knew it. The people around them, once passive, were now ignited. Phones were raised, cameras rolling. The tension swirled like a storm about to break. David remained still, his breathing steady, his gaze unwavering. His phone was held high, the speaker on, amplifying Emily's resolute voice. It rang through the hush like a bell in the night. "Am I free to go?" David's voice, calm yet weighted with defiance, shattered the stillness. His question was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 moments just like this one. He was not arguing. He was demanding clarity. Around them, the crowd swelled. Curiosity spread like wildfire. A mechanic in a grease-streaked jumpsuit fished out his phone, recording every move. A woman in a navy blazer, her expression set in quiet disbelief, whispered to the person beside her while keeping her camera aimed steady. They were no longer bystanders. They were witnesses, pulled into the current of the unfolding reckoning. Officer Brian Holt shifted uneasily. His eyes darted between David and his partner, Mark Denny. Denny, the older of the two, remained stiff, but something in his posture betrayed discomfort. The balance of power had shifted too swiftly for them to grasp. Emily Carter's voice, even through the phone, had changed the tide. David was no longer just a man on the street. He was someone they could not push aside, someone who held power, not just through his daughter's influence, but through the presence of the people, through the unblinking eyes of countless cameras capturing the truth in real time. David exhaled, his voice a quiet storm. "I told you," he said, his tone unshaken. "I don't resist. I don't fight, but I won't be pushed around." Mark Denny's fingers twitched near his belt, the motion almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. The damage had already been done. Brian cleared his throat, his voice wavering. "Sir, we were just doing our job." David's eyes darkened. "Your job?" he echoed, voice thick with restrained fury. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to profile, not to intimidate, not to treat a man like a threat because of the color of his skin." Brian flinched. He had no training for this kind of confrontation, not one where the power lay with the man he was supposed to control. Mark Denny, more hardened, clenched his jaw, but even he could feel it. The moment had spun away from them. They had miscalculated, and now they were left to face the consequences. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, voices rising in waves of disbelief, frustration, anger. This wasn't just about David anymore. It was about something far greater, something that had simmered. For years, it was about the system that allowed moments like this to keep happening. The weight of history pressed down on them, and they knew this was bigger than two officers, bigger than one stop on the street. David stood firm, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. The police had overstepped, and now, standing in the aftermath, they had no excuse left to give. They weren't in control anymore. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark Denny exhaled sharply. His voice was tight, reluctant. "You're free to go, sir." David didn't move immediately. He let the words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of acknowledgement. They needed to understand. This wasn't just about this one interaction. Their authority, their assumed power, had been cracked open. It had been exposed as fragile, built on the illusion of control. And today, that illusion had shattered. The street held its breath. The crowd stood silent, phones still lifted, capturing the final fragments of the encounter. This wasn't just a victory for David. It was a victory for every person who had ever been stopped, harassed, reduced to something less than human under the glare of a badge. David turned, his movements slow and deliberate. He did not rush. He did not flee. He walked with purpose, each step a declaration that this moment belonged to him, not to them. As he reached the edge of the block, his phone buzzed. He didn't need to check it. He already knew. Emily. "Thanks, Em," he whispered, the words carrying more than just gratitude. They carried relief. They carried triumph. Behind him, the officers stood rigid, their frustration etched into the tension in their jaws. But it was too late. The world had already seen. The moment had passed, and it had shifted something deep within the current of time. His phone buzzed again as he reached his doorstep. Emily's voice, steady yet urgent, greeted him as he answered. "It's everywhere, Dad," she said. "People are angry. They're not letting it go." David sighed. He had seen this before. Outrage, headlines, protests, and then silence. The world moved on. But this time, something felt different. "How bad is it?" he asked. "For them?" Emily replied. "Really bad. The public isn't just watching. They're demanding answers." David leaned against the door frame, feeling the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. "They'll issue a statement," he murmured. Talk about procedures, reviews, but no real accountability. Maybe, Emily admitted, but this time people aren't just sharing it. They're demanding action. The footage was already on the news across every platform, sparking conversations in homes, in offices, on the streets. David settled into his chair by the window, the neighborhood outside unchanged, yet somehow different. A message lit up his phone from an old friend, a retired professor, short but resolute. Proud of you. This had to happen. David stared at the screen, his emotions tangled. Pride wasn't the right word. It was something deeper, something heavier. This wasn't about him. This was about the fight, the reckoning, the change that could no longer be ignored. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. He already knew who it was. Emily. You didn't have to come, he said as he opened the door. I know, she replied, her gaze steady. But you didn't think I'd miss this, did you? They sat together, the news humming in the background, replaying the moment that had captured the world's attention. They'll try to spin it, Emily said. Try to bury it. David glanced out at the quiet street, where neighbors whispered, reporters lingered. He smiled, slow and knowing. Not this time. Emily leaned back, her expression set with determination. Then let's make sure of it.